the anti-aircraft missiles his forces capture from the Ukrainians. I support the possibility, he says, of giving these to the military units of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. Please do this. The Kremlin's position towards Ukraine has barely moved since the day this invasion began 2.5 weeks ago. This war can stop when you want it to. You just need to lay down your arms, surrender, give in to all our demands, and forget about being a part of Western Europe. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Well, joining me now is the military analyst Justin Crump, who is the chief executive of the risk assessment company Javelin, and also formerly a British Army tank commander. Thank you for joining us here on BBC News. I wonder if we could just start off. We saw some analysis in that report there by Frank Gardner, but I wonder if you could just first off take us through the key events as far as it goes today.
Yep.
So this is the map.
Yep.
Where are we?
Yeah, we can see, Russia's making advances in the north. Obviously, they're around Kiev, both to the west and the east. They're pushing on Kharkiv. They've been held up there for a long time. And they have a big focus on the Donbass in the southeast, where they're clearing forwards and engaging Ukrainian positions that have always been around Donbass since 2014. And, of course, pushing strongly from the south. So you see all the objectives they're trying to achieve around the country there. And most successful in the south and east, and obviously slower going for them in the north and the east.
OK, everybody is watching what is taking place to the north there and the capital, Kiev. So we have got some pictures, and I think a lot of people are used to seeing the images of that convoy.
Yes.
Tell us what's going on here, because there have been reports of it dispersing.
That's right. I mean, it's been broken up today. I think some of the reports about the convoy being bogged in, stuck, completely surrounded by flooded fields and people dying in their vehicles of coal were slightly over-exaggerated. Obviously, there was a lot of Russian force stuck northwest of Kiev. You can see the terrain there. It's very wooded. It is quite constrained. The Ukrainians did flood some of the fields, and it's taken them a long while to push forward enough to start opening up their forces. But this is all part of building the ring around Kiev and pushing down towards it on the southwest side, which they're gradually doing, and cutting off those routes west out of the city that people have been using to get out of the city. So now really the only exit is to the south.
OK, so you mentioned there, interestingly, the terrain.
Yes.
Is it to the advantage of the Ukrainians? So if we just look at some of the defences, and this is a satellite image, I believe?
Yes.
Are the Ukrainians able to use that to their advantage rather than the Russians? Because it's unknown to them, I suppose, and they've got this heavy armoury as well that they're moving around.
Well, they've got a lot of advantages. I mean, you're defending your own homes, and you can see that some of the terrain around Kiev there and some of the areas that have been destroyed so far, Russian artillery firing, which actually picked up from the satellites. And you can see how they've defended the boulevards into the city, and it's all quite close terrain. And as a tank commander, that's really where you don't want to be without infantry. You see those obstacles there. It's very hard to clear through that. You can do it. You can clear that with artillery. You can bring engineers forward to do it. But all the time you're working with obstacles like this in a tank, you are held up, you are vulnerable, because that's when infantry can close in on you. And tanks are very weak from the side and the back. They can't be armoured everywhere, so they're armoured from the front and the turret, because that's what you expect to have facing the enemy. And when you're in this very close terrain, you're very vulnerable to people coming up alongside you if you don't have infantry with you.
Just before we look at some of the anti-tank weaponry that is being deployed, it looked very rudimentary. How effective were those hedgehogs and the barricades in the road?
Well, it always works. You can see, this is, as Frank showed a couple of minutes ago as well. So this is actually a British supplied N-law being fired. Very easy to use as a weapon system, very cheap to use as a weapon system. And you can see how it actually flies above the top of the tank and fires down into it through the weaker armour. So when you're negotiating obstacles like the ones we just showed, you're obviously stuck. And even though they're rudimentary, you've got to stop, you've got to clear them. And that's when people can close up with you, like you see there, engage you from the side, engage you from the top, engage you from the rear. So it's a very dangerous environment for armour. And again, you can see the N-law itself there. It is a very effective system. It's a very modern system, about $30,000, which seems expensive, but to take out a $2.5 million tank, that's a pretty good return on investment. And again, anyone can use one. And you also have the Javelin, which is the longer range anti-tank guided weapon. That goes about 4 or 5 kilometres. Much more expensive, about 3 times the price, requires more training. And that's great for more open countryside. And Ukraine's fired, I think, 300 of these. 280 have hit the target and destroyed Russian vehicles.
Now, Is that Ukraine armoury and weaponry? It's not supplied by the US, because it has been promised, hasn't it?
It is. That's the sort of aid that's flowing from the West as defensive aid, of those sorts of missile systems. And the anti-air missile systems, again, Frank showed a helicopter being shot down by a Western supplied system in that last clip.
We've heard a lot about some of the cities that have been encircled by Russian troops. So let's take us to Sumy. What's going on here?
So in the northeast, actually, that's a multiple launch rocket system, and just above it you can see three what we call 2S-19, which are field guns. The British equivalent is called AS-90, so a very long-barreled armoured field gun. And they're firing from within the city, actually at targets in the city. Sumy is a problem for the Russians. It's holding up a lot of their supplies, and they're finding it very difficult to get things through there. And some of the forces from Kiev have actually turned back to Sumy, about 100 kilometres in the rear, to increase the pressure on this town, and also Chernihiv, which is just northeast of Kiev, and both of those need to be cleared by Russia.
So those rockets that we just saw, it looked very indiscriminate. Are they quite focused and very targeted?
No. Russia has a real shortage of precision-guided munitions, partly because they're expensive, partly because they don't have the chips to build things. So they're using a lot of unguided weapons. They're not necessarily just targeting civilian areas, so we're seeing more of that. They are slightly more precise than that, but they're just less worried about what we would call collateral casualties, so civilian sites being hit. They've been hitting food supplies and things like that. And when you look at their overall plan that we're showing here, you can see that they're doing okay against their objectives. And the big thing for them is in the southeast, where north of Donbass, that yellow swirl is the Ukrainian centre of their regular forces from before the war. But you can see how they've got so much still to clear in the centre of the country, where they've been held up by Kharkiv, and in the north. And fundamentally, they've bitten off a lot of cities. At some point, they've got to start actually clearing them to allow the forces that are investing each city to move on to the next one. And Mariupol is the first city we're looking at to fall.
If we could just keep this map up very quickly. Crimea is highly strategic, isn't it, for the Russian and for Ukraine as well? Just why?
It's a very important port anyway. It's historically important to Russia because it was always a Russian possession, not a Ukrainian one. Khrushchev gifted it to Ukraine. So there's always been this argument, was it Russian when always Russian? But it does have a strategic location in the Black Sea. It had the most important naval base in Sevastopol, and it's been an armory for Russia, certainly since 2014 in particular. And their best forces are there and in the east, so it's no surprise that those forces are doing better. They fought the Ukrainians for 8 years. They've always been operational. The forces coming in from Belarus thought they were going on exercise, and they found out they weren't before they crossed the border. They're very much less experienced in working together, and they've taken much more time to get going.
Now, we've also had reports of some senior figures within the Russian military being killed. This is one of them. How much does that damage the Russian side?
It's obviously not great to be losing your commanders, and there's a combination of reasons. They're losing them because they're going forward to try and sort out problems. Some have died that way, and they're losing others because they're staying too far back, and the Russian communication systems are not working as advertised. Some of that might be corruption in procurement. They have encrypted mobile phones that don't work, so they're having to speak in clear on mobile phones. And of course, that's allowing Russian commanders to be intercepted. And losing the commander, losing the command post just breaks your whole ability to coordinate. Armies are greater than the sum of their parts. As soon as you start disintegrating them into small groups of people moving around with no coordination, they're going to struggle. And that's one of the things that's been affecting the Russians, though it is too early to write them off. They are still grinding forwards, and they will continue to do so.
OK, Justin Crump, thank you very much for that analysis. Thank you. This is BBC News, and of course events taking place in Ukraine is our lead story. Let's look at the movement of people. And we understand now that more than 2.5 million people have fled Ukraine. And the humanitarian situation is stretching resources to the limit in several neighbouring countries. At least 1.5 million of the refugees have made their way to neighbouring Poland. Well, Poland's parliament has passed emergency legislation that allows Ukrainians fleeing the war the right to live and work in the country for 18 months. The refugees will receive the right to access free healthcare and education, as well as social benefits. Our correspondent, Adam Easton, is in Warsaw for us. Adam, just take us through a little bit more detail about this emergency legislation. Has it been welcomed? What sort of reaction has it received?
It's received support from all political parties. There is overwhelmingly sympathy here in